In this session, we're going to gather very important women who work in strategic sectors in mining, infrastructure, financing, technology. And they will reflect on the perspectives and challenges that our country is facing nowadays, but also the strategic position that we have. So this is going to be part of what we're going to listen to. After that, we're going to have a break, but during this morning, we're going to have very interesting panels regarding on how we can continue reflecting how our country can be one step ahead of the volatility that we see in this world, and we just heard about that in William's presentation. So I would like to share with you that geopolitical factors, as we were listening to recently, the agenda, infrastructure was a key element. We're talking about Mexico's example. We know that our country has a very advantageous position. We have to keep on obviously continue taking advantage, and these are key sectors to revert figures in the growth of Latin America. And of course, there's this competition between Chile and the United States. The main focus here was on how that could be a great opportunity for our region. So that's also part of what I will let you know that we're going to listen in this upcoming panel. So we're going to start then with Sebastián Aguirre, economical news person. He is going to be the conductor of this panel, and it's special that it's going to be women from different areas that will lead us through a very interesting conversation. Sebastián, go ahead. Thank you, Vivi, for that presentation. How are you doing? Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So stimulating to look at this big hall full of people, everybody obviously interested in the subject that we're going to talk to this morning, and also looking at what's going to happen in this scenario and regarding how our country is going to be able to face this high uncertainty scenario. And the conversation today with this panel, we're going to have the perspective of women leaders and perspectives on key industries for global challenges, and we're going to have time. That's great. We're going to have a lot of time. Fortunately, today we're going to have the possibility of listening to our guests' perspectives in a scenario, in a ever-changing economical and geopolitical scenario, with the uncertainty levels. Well, we know uncertainty is part of the landscape, but uncertainty probably is higher than before. We're going to give particular emphasis, perhaps looking forward. And this puts investors on alert, which is obviously natural. We also believe that this uncertainty has a role in the creation of opportunity, and that's also the point we would like to talk today. Look at what are the opportunities for Chile and for the economies of the region, which we know obviously that has direct incidence on what happens in Chile. So we have a mixture of uncertainty and high potential opportunities. There are obviously gaps that have to continue being closed so we can accelerate the development of some sectors which are called to move and push forward economical growth. And as Carla was saying, this is an urgent conversation, especially in the context of what's happened this past week. This panel is going to be very interesting. It connects different experiences, different trajectories, different industries, and I believe this is going to enrich this conversation. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. Here we have Lía Rojas, Executive Director of the Chilean Renewable Energies Association. Welcome, Lía. We'll also have Amparo Cornejo, Director of the Mining Board, Chief Sustainability Officer. Amparo, good morning. We'll also have Gloria Hutt, President of COPSA. Thank you for joining us. Camila Gatica, Senior Manager of Amazon Web Services and Director of Chilean Association, ACTI. And with Pilar Concha, General Manager of the Chilean Manager of Investment Funds, ACAFI. Welcome, Pilar. So let's start with a broader vision of the scenario that we're facing in this context that we're talking about with a lot of changes and uncertainty. I would like to start from each one of yours experience. What are the main global factors that are influencing investment decisions and how those decisions impact in countries like Chile with the particularities that we have? Amparo, let's start with you. Well, good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. I would like to start saying how proud I am to be in a women's panel when we've been talking about the feminization of society, and if women give rationality or emotionality to this. So I'm very proud to see all my colleagues here talking on such relevant matters. From the perspective of the mining industry, I see a lot of people from this industry in the room, but we never imagined that the prices of copper that we're looking at today. But beyond the conjunction, I believe that the demand for copper comes mainly, it's been growing based on very solid reasons that have to do with decarbonization, electromobility, the growth in Latin America and Asia with technology, digitalization. So we are in a juncture that is unique. It's very virtuous for the mining industry and mainly for Chile. There are all the fundamentals for growing. I believe that in the past few years, how industry has continued betting on Chile. When we look forward, investment projects go beyond the $100 million and $100 billion, and nowadays mining and copper in particular, not only are we looking at new projects, but there's also some growth space in the brownfield projects, which means increasing production in places that we are already operating. And I believe that this has a high impact because it means bringing more tons of copper faster and also doing it with lower environmental impact in places that are already where the projects are already happening. So I believe that this rally of copper and what it means for Chile is a great opportunity. Obviously, it has to do with taxes and the impact it has on society. Also, it has to do with the mining ecosystem. I believe in Chile we have a very robust system. We have suppliers. There's a whole chain. And William Maloney was just talking about human capital. I believe that if there is an industry where Chile has capacity in terms of people, professional quality, it's the mining area. So there are a series of positive pressures. Obviously there are risks, but I believe that we keep on competing with other countries in the region, like countries like Peru, for example. Peru is developing in a very intensive way. But I also believe that the potential growth that Argentina can have in mining could have an impact, especially in our resource and our talent. We have a risk of loss of these. Could those developments in region make a better investment scenario for Chile? Yeah, well, Chile has the main aspects which is having the resources, having the financial stability, clear rules of the game, professional capacity. I believe that there is also an environmental system that's robust, and there is some pressure because we have a shared conviction of all the actors that we have to continue deepening what we are doing in terms of moving forward with environmental licenses, and we have to continue developing this based on the recent modifications. And we also have something that is perhaps unique, and it has to do with the acceptance of mining. 5 years ago, it was very different. Today, I believe all the stakeholders have focused on relating with the communities where we operate, and I also believe that this use or focus on electromobility, the use of mining in day-to-day life makes it closer with different actors, stakeholders in society, and with young people. We see that young people want to study mining, technical careers related. And 5 years ago, this was not thought of. So, to close this first question, I believe that we are in an exceptional point, and mining can continue being a motor to move the country forward.
And only what the factors that have an incidence in the decision of investment in energy. Well, thank you. I really want to thank for this time for a technical discussion led by women in times where we're also, we're working on the balance, not only from 2025, but from the periods, the end of this administration, the beginning of the next one, and the challenges that industry, a lot of industries, we're looking at the capital and the international markets, and we see how this will be a priority in the agenda. So I think this is a great opportunity to share that and to take notes, right? So thank you. We see, looking from the energy standpoint, and particularly the electric sector, we'll see the distinction between the energy and electrification. I think that's quite important. And we are seeing how today there's a trend towards less availability of foreign capital. Therefore, there's more demands, or the capital is more selective in terms of projects that they decide to allocate their investments. And so that demand or more selectivity, of course, that creates a stress, in the set of projects that will be eligible. Therefore, it's not only in Chile, but in the world. Today, everything that has to do with the environment, which goes beyond, energy in the sector of renewable energies, there's this belief that it's just enough with, having natural comparative advantages. So many times we have seen a discussion of economical agenda in the investment, Chile, just because they have lots of radiation or lots of wind and some sources were the main source of electricity for us. If we look at the history of electrification in Chile, sometimes we may think that's enough to ensure the flow investment. And what we have learned, I think, renewable investments, I think they have been happening for 10, 15 years, and that's not enough. And so that's where I would like to share with you how sophistication and the regulation of markets matter. The electric world and the energy sector is hugely regulated, and regulation is a positive factor because it allows you to organize a sector that, before we start with the forum, it's a complex area. It's an arid place. So that depth and that perfecting markets, that basically works so that we can provide what we have called in the agenda, the main principle, the jurisdictional certainty that is needed by any investor, but particularly in a regulated market, and how things will evolve and what are the reforms that are needed. And so this does not mean that markets should not be reformed because regulation already exists. Quite the contrary. Today, in the opportunity of energy transition, which only represent the opportunity for investment and for more infrastructure and rechange and the relocation of investment. Like William said, this is what's happening in this investment sector. We're relocating and we're transforming in a sector that traditionally worked based on hydrothermal energy to a sector that is highly based on renewable energies and storage, and that changes things. Now, regulations, of course, if they can be modified, or if we need to modify them, we need jurisdictional certainty in the sense that what are the changes and in which direction they will happen. So I think that is the set, that is the state of the art. We have a market that is hugely attractive for that effect of substitution that economists call, changing a way of operating a market for another way of operating. That's what's happening today from conventional to renewable, but we need to have jurisdictional certainty. Therefore, reforms not only need to be chosen and prioritized, but also discussed, and we need to consider the technical dialogue in depth. We need to consider the entire sector, the entire ecosystem that is around the construction of this regulation. This is extremely relevant in this new administration, and the jurisdiction certainty today has a different factor, in the international context. So with the clarity of the rules, yes, we are competing actually. Right, Gloria, let's look at your view from infrastructure. Thank you for having me. I'm very proud of being here in the panel, and this has been quite a discussion when it comes to rationality, and I'm going to do my own intervention here. I would also like to thank the presentation of William, which was very clear and illustrative. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, public infrastructure, we're talking about private investment in association with the government, but also an investment that causes a social impact. That's quite important. And while we're living in such a volatile world, and we had measured the index of volatility, we need to look in the long term. These are all investments of 30 years or more. And when we look at the world in 2050, for example, we see that there will be a big concentration of areas in this urban space will be a scarce resource, and we will see this tripling, 3 times almost 70 trillion of passengers in the kilometers. So that means infrastructure, for example, for mobility, is going to be an urgent resource. We'll need so that we can have a satisfactory level of life. But there are other areas of public infrastructure, such as hospitals, airports. We have been diversifying, and also prison systems, and different areas. Now, what we see is that there is a complex scenario because there's such volatility. And because Chile is a small country, so it competes in the region with Brazil. In Brazil, one bidding process includes 5 highways or 3 airports. Here, it's just minor scale. So it's even more difficult to be able to compete, and you need to work with more resources. So that is the jurisdictional certainty, as previously mentioned. So the fact that you have a solid framework makes investment less risky, or at least there's less of a probability for things not to continue happening. So I think Chile has to be very careful with what they have accomplished. In September this year, we'll commemorate 30 years since the first car that went through a concession process at the tunnel in Melon, and that was awarded in 1993, and the first car went through that in 1995, 2 years later. Now, currently, since the granting of the projects until we move the first machines, we have about 5 years. So So that's a concerning symptom, a symptom of risk, for example, in matters of ensuring recollection in the long term with regulation or with mechanisms that make it really hard to keep things, for example, the free flow toll. If we incorporate recollection risk, some suggestions. And on the other hand, Chile needs to be very competitive. And sadly, when we look at the World Index of Competitiveness in regions, Latin America is still at the end in every level, and there's 4 areas that determine competitiveness. There's the competitiveness of the government, of businesses, of infrastructure, and public systems. And in competitiveness and infrastructure, this is quite low. And so there's a challenge and there's gaps, and we think that uncertainties are being more noticeable. The last processes and competences, there's been 1 or 2 people bidding for the process. It's usually 1. It's not because the price is a competition, because there's a regulated price, but there's an increase in the risks are associated to ensure, you can never ensure, but at least making sure the project is feasible in the long term. And that also has to do with the investment, decision. And I really, but there's another impact, because what William said, having more companies provides more innovation, more diversity, different methods, different specialists. So the deterioration, is in the entire system. So we are very proud of what's been happening in Chile in the last 30 years. Over 100 projects, over $25,000 million of investment, association, partnerships, public-private partnerships. So I think, it's a great society. There is a contract, and partners need to have a reasonable balance between parts. So we see how that balance is, it's how we're incorporating some risks, and it's important to unlock some projects. Just to keep in mind, from 2020 to 2025, there are 500 projects that are granted with different natures, with structured financing. So out of those, not more than 3 have actually moved along. So it's over $10 million. So that would be very good for economies. So unlocking all of that is urgent. And I think it's the first measure, the first thing I would ask for the next president. Yes, and we have asked them that. Yes, Camila. Yes, I'm sorry, I have this microphone, but it's not working. But, well, I would like to second what everyone said here. I'm really thankful of belonging in an area that is a step behind, so I can be in the other areas in the panel. And I think from the technological world, what's good is that, there's a point where we all agree on, which is regulation, and we'll get there soon. But when it comes to business, we look at things globally. I'd like to talk about AI. It's something we've heard about and everywhere. The bus stop, we hear all of that everywhere. And so we see how there's an important growth in terms of investment in AI. We see this is an important figure, and it says that about 39% of growth in AI and about 53.8% in generative AI. So we see a relevant trend, and of course in our company, since we provide cloud services, we need to have a robust system and a framework that will allow us to continue moving forward. And this is a relevant focus for investment for countries. And Chile today is in a position, where we should be proud of. In the last study in AI, Chile was in the first place, and it's something that we need to be mindful of and keeping it, and that's where we'll converge on some areas, responsible regulation and enabling regulation where we can safeguard people, but at the same time we can allow development and we can incentivize adoption, which is something that William mentioned as well when we talk about the adoption of technologies, the focus on adoption and not so much in regulation, and having enabling regulating frameworks that will allow that. to have a harmonization, which is something we see is quite complex. We see there's different verticals, different infrastructures, technology has another regulation. So I think that those areas should create certainties for those that want to invest in Chile. And that's what we preach for regulation, to regulate the use of technology beyond technology itself. We know this is something that's moving forward. Years ago, we were not talking about agents, and now we're all talking about agents. So when we talk about regulating, having a regular coordination where we look at different areas, for example, we have a data center plan, we have a national plan for AI, we have a cybersecurity bill that came out last year, and also another bill coming this year for personal data. And so we need to create an attractive system for those that want to invest in Chile. And the last point that I'd like to touch on so that we can leave time for other questions, because we could be here forever. When it comes to investment and sustainability, I think when we talk about investing in Chile, once again, we are in a privileged sector. We have someone here working in renewable energy. We're really proud of it, and I would like to say that about 100% of the energy that we get in Amazon is compensated by renewable energy. We have a water positive commitment that we met 7 years ahead, so now we return more water to communities, more than the water we're using directly. And so when we talk about investing in a country, and especially in technology, is how will that converge with sustainability and investment? I think that's what I want to highlight. And it's a competitive sector, right? Technology. We have other countries in the region that are also doing their own efforts in getting the best position. You ask any regulator, any authority in Latin America, they all want to be a regional hub. We're a regional hub, invest here. So there's no silver bullet, so that we can look at that from the AWS. We have different areas. We need to look at adoption. We need to have a focus on sustainability, something that is quite relevant. And when we talk about data center, it's not this idea of, living in an area that is completely empty. So it's not only about the demand and what William said, how different verticals are adopting technology. How are we really internalizing them in local companies? And how do we see that these are being used so that we can be more efficient in different areas? Yes, and there's a huge opportunity, right? Pilar, let's look at McAfee's view. Thank you, Kalenis, for the invitation. It's an honor having this wonderful group of women sharing. It's not easy being the last one. You have mentioned everything that I wanted to mention, but all panelists here are wonderful. They have mentioned many things that I had considered. And on one hand, I'm really happy to see that there is quite a consensus in how regulation and jurisdictional certainty are key. So today, regardless of the political sector where you come from, we are quite aware of the need of providing investment and making sure that foreign investment is important. Carla also mentioned that in her presentation. And so we need for people from abroad coming in to invest in Chile. So that's why we need to work on different factors which will help us, because when there's no jurisdictional certainty, and like we say in Chile, when the rules of the game are changed, people just leave, and that's sort of automatic. And in a way, we need to build an ecosystem that has clear rules, not only when it comes to infrastructure and long-term projects, but I see that from the financial standpoint, where as we see regulation projects, we see how there's a robust market that can finance projects coming from abroad, because while foreign people come from foreign investment, I think that it's a good mix when the foreign capital is associated or partnering with Chilean capital. And as we have good platforms, because on one hand, human capital, yes, there's people that were prepared, but the ecosystem is not created by people only. There's institutions, there's platforms, and when you have the right regulation, and when this is all well considered and it's all structured in technical matters and goes beyond political colors or personal opinions, in a way that can strengthen and make financing more robust. And it's not only about foreigners coming to invest in Chile, but also Chileans through their own savings. They can have attractive profitability for the retirement, for infrastructure projects, or if there's a mid-term investments that could be beneficial for everyone. So I firmly believe in how robust the market should be, so that it can all be financed. And just to wrap up and to complement, because I wanted to mention what Camilo mentioned, the ESG matter, for us as an association, that's really important. I think that foreigners are looking at this more and more often, and while there's greenwashing questioning and some people saying this is no longer fashionable, I think this is something that we should not let go, and it's something for the long term, and we need to consider all conversations. We need to have women participating in decision making and in investment making, decision making, and I think that when creating these ecosystems, we need to consider all factors that we should see at all times. It's not only an environmental thing, it's also social factors. And when there's social issues, we see problems in the country as well. And in terms of governance, we need for human capital, which is what we need to strengthen, we need for it to happen under an appropriate governance, and we need to have diversity and good policies. I have a general round of questions, just if you can share something brief, but it could summarize what we're discussing now. When there's an era where there's more fragmentation, where the rules of the game are being redefined, can Chile project and promote itself towards investors as a refuge, as a platform where things are more steady, there's a long-term investment? Well, I think that if we were to look at the region, yes, we are like a safe house, and I think that's why Chile is a good platform to then go out to the next of the continent, but we cannot ensure that. And having the fear of not being sure, that's good, because we cannot take any false steps. Camila, what would you say? I would like to second what you're saying. I think it's in Chile, there's a key moment now. We've been told and we feel, and I will quote that, it's Europe or Latin America, we're so steady, and we have an economy that has been quite steady, while there's been fluctuations and difficult years in comparison to our neighboring countries. We're quite steady. So in that terms, in AWS, we want to put the first data center with over 4,500 million, with a cluster of data center which will be serviced for the entire region from Chile towards the region, as you just mentioned. But I think that we should not panic. And, not long ago, there was a Strand Partners study for AWS saying that costs, for example, for compliance, going back to regulations, today with the regulations that we have, out of $100 companies investing for regulations, 19 will go to regulation compliance. So what's happening now with this intention of regulating and moving forward and upping the standard, and how we continue with this position, there's a fear in 73% of companies, many of them small and medium companies, startups like Willie mentioned. There's a fear of, those $19 being so much more, even twice or three times more, if we continue having this regulation burden on companies. So it's something to consider. Yes, thank you.
Gloria, Amparo, and Lía, any comments? Yes, if we want to be a refuge, which is a tremendous advantage to compensate on size, if we want to be the super refuge, we have the size that we have, so that's disadvantage in itself. But we have to reinforce this. It's not spontaneous. It's not because we've met more than 100 projects. We can lose those very fast. I believe that I read some opinions sometimes that are very irresponsible, where the fact that a concession has a profit is demonized. If we look at this image of this fat person counting bills, if we look at it, then a great part, many of these international pension funds are the financiers of these projects. So those funds cannot go anywhere. They've come here. For example, the new industrial bridge over the Biobío River. It's the first urban concession outside the metropolitan region. And the investor is a pension fund investor. So we have to really treat that with extreme care, because we cannot risk the pension funds, for example, in this case from Australia, with some very irresponsible regulations. We've talked a lot about permits, and permits are necessary, but there are some regulatory proposals that just break this. We have to take care of that. I believe that in mining, in a way, Chile is a refuge, and investments are long-term and resources are here. But I think that the discussion here is how urgent is it to us to develop more mining and not distract ourselves in terms of competences and what kind of percentage of this investment goes to other countries. We cannot miss the opportunity of developing minerals with a sense of urgency. And in agreement with Gloria, I personally am bothered when we speak about permits, because I believe we reduce the level of this discussion, because all the stakeholders require for a robust, clear, predictable systems for permits gives us certainty. Analia, the refuge today is an active sector. Chile has become the focus of Latin America for investments in renewable energy and storage. In 2025, we had 4.5 billion in investments, and 3.5 of those were for renewable energies. But there are also $8,500 million are for renewable energies. The problem with records is when and how are we going to keep on breaking these records? Is this sustainable? It's not just reaching a record, but also being able to overcome it and sustain it over time. So therein comes my thoughts. In terms of refuge, we cannot put a limit to this refuge. It has to be expansible. And I would like to join this regarding the importance that electrification has for the purpose of the exchange of the enormous amount of money that we spend for fossil imports. They're not just for electricity, it's for in terms of transportation, industry, mining. Mining is pretty much electrified, but in Chile, the rate of electrification is low. The same with the rest of Latin American countries. It doesn't go beyond 23%. And nevertheless, 64% of our energy, global consumptions, are dependent on fossil fuels that are imported by 98%. How cannot we be worried about this? So the great opportunity of this refuge is to increase the size of the electrical market based on storage and renewable energies and any other sources that are able to generate energy that can actually lower that account of imports. It's $15 billion in imports. It's 4 points of the gross domestic product. So we spend all that money importing fossil fuels. So the vision is to become a refuge for investments, yes, in renewable energies and storage, but the limitation cannot be the size of the electrical market. We have to electrify. After this round, we're going to have some questions where we're going to actually deepen in each of the sectors, and I would like to start with the sector of investments, Pilar, with investment funds. According to the data of ACAFI, the participation of foreign investment in Chile is 6%. What do we need to move forward external investment in that sector? Okay, and the industry of funds is an industry that manages $40 billion. Only 6% comes from from foreigners that come to invest as such. It's very noticeable that this market we had foreigners coming in when we changed regulations in 2016. Before that, it was 0. And that's when we had certain limits that allowed foreign investors to come, and the market has grown and has made us more optimistic, because in the end, I believe we can keep on growing in those lines. But it's very recent from 2016. So I believe that first off, we have to show Chile, as Chile continues being an attractive destination for investment, they will come, whether it's through funds or directly. Doesn't really matter how. But we do have to ensure this, and I think we're all in agreement. We all agree with this. So the industry of funds, just like NSGC, this regulation allowed to create this way for foreigners to come to Chile. I believe that is also extremely important to review regulation issues. Just like Camila was saying, we've had tremendous regulatory load with the threats of investment rules that could actually end investments for funds. So the idea is that foreigners that come to invest in Chile, they are able to invest in very attractive and necessary for the country, which many times we as Chileans don't tend to invest. We have Canadian funds that invest in agro-resources in the south, and it's not this, old capitalist having lunch in New York. We're talking about this person who are a Canadian teacher who put his savings in a pension fund, and those resources are being used to invest in Chile. So I believe we're at a point where we have conversations and discussions of looking how to improve our ecosystem in general. So we need to generate the rules and incentives to bring foreign capital, which helps us in terms of work and growth. I have a comment. I think you both have mentioned the existence of what's behind investments, in pension funds, for example. I believe that we have an obligation as engines of the economy to share this better with society. I think there is a joint work. How do we share this outlook of business that, this contrast between a caricature, a business person versus to what's actually real. So yeah, we have to also influence the public opinion. Camila, in terms of digital infrastructure, this has been a very fast development. Chile's been pioneer in technology in the area, developing 5G, for example, underwater cable, the data centers. So what do we need to do to consolidate that position, in the position of Chile as a digital hub in the context that AI has a more and more relevant role? Well, thank you. There are many points here. It has to do with human capital. I believe Page Partners showed a number, if I'm not wrong, 48% of positions in IT are vacant because of lack of trained people. There is an important gap. This is Chile. Yeah, this is Chile indeed. And what William Malone was saying is we're importing talent when we're supposed to develop it here. We have to develop public and private alliances. We've trained more than 100,000 people in cloud capabilities, AI, and I believe that's also an opportunity that we have to start in covering those gaps. In regulatory terms, we've all mentioned our pains. We have to talk in terms of recognizing the operational impact that regulations have. We see sometimes that, everyone has their own agenda. We have a law for cybersecurity that we have to report in 3 hours when you have 72 hours. When there is a cybersecurity issue, we have a definition of critical infrastructure for cybersecurity. So there are different regulations. We talk about financial issues, but financial people have to report to 5 or 6 different institutions. So in terms of sustainability, that we can have the tools for renewable energy. I believe that the lack of incentives is something that has to be addressed. We're always looking into how to regulate it, how to control it, how we protect ourselves from these new technologies, but we don't talk about how are we adopt and promote them. And that's something that we have to take a look. The last, I think, the timeline for implementation regulations are too much. Every time that the companies are demanded of something new, it calls for an internal adapting process, which has impacts on operations, and that means that companies has to change human capital, internal protocols, and that calls for time, and it generates an impact when we try to keep on being a hub. So that has impact. I think I've said my what I wanted to say. Gloria, in terms of infrastructure, this is an area that's very well known by foreign investors. How do we attract new stakeholders? What do we have to protect? What has to be promoted? What risks do we need to mitigate to bring new investors? I believe there are some things in the short term, in terms of management, that could probably give more dynamism that this industry has already proved that it can show, and that it's actually slowed down, maybe in terms of management on the side of the state. Basically, in terms of coordination between organs of the state to give permits, for example, and those are things that can be solved in the short term. And we've suggested the formation of a group that depends on the president, dedicated especially on developing an agenda for solving what's stuck. But also have to look at the long term. In the long term, there are some very important scenarios. For example, with the pension reform that's going to increase by 40% the mass of local savings. Prepare good legislation that those funds are able to be used alternative for investment along with international funds. That's something that can become something very attractive. The other way in which this can be attractive is to start thinking in terms of that when the first contracts are actually ending. How can we have this concept of networks? We've given individual projects, and each project with the concept of project finance, it has to be properly financed. But we look at urban highways, and they have their network, and they have different contracts, and there are some that have different pricing. So that affects the possibility of having a more fluid relationship with users, where we can offer them a good idea of the service quality that we have. But we have to start looking in terms of larger projects, but making large-scale investments. For example, in hospitals, we adjudicate for hospitals, or the same with the airports. To me, that is the next element in the scale and diversification. There are sectors that we haven't addressed. For example, last year in São Paulo, in Brazil, they gave the concession for the building and maintenance of 29 high schools. If we used the same mechanism of concession for educational infrastructure, we could probably give a big jump. Let's not forget that in Atacama, there were 30,000 children without classes because there was infrastructure problem. That's an irretrievable damage. We have to look perhaps in the same way. We can invest the same way that are done with hospitals. But the Ministry of Health administers these hospitals. So in this case, the Educational Authority can keep them operating this, but in terms of infrastructure, can be offered or developed in a more homogeneous way. So the challenges are huge, but what moves me, as Amparo was saying, as IPSO was saying, and there's a recent survey in the levels of satisfaction in countries with the quality of infrastructure. Chile is around 74% in terms of airports and highways. So the recognition to the standard is there. But if we go to, for example, to people's opinion on companies or the service that they deliver, the perception falls, and there is a gap that needs to be met. And this gap is delivering the service in public infrastructure that belongs to all. People sometimes think that this infrastructure is property of people. So it belongs to all of us here sitting. Thank you, Gloria. Amparo, on the side of mining, we know how relevant this is to energy transition. How do you evaluate the positioning of Chile at a global level to attract investment in critical minerals? I believe Chile is synonymous of mining and synonymous of copper. I believe we have very consolidated industry that has a variety of having state actors like Codelco, foreign investors. I believe that the main question here is more than how the positioning is, how do we maintain our competitivity towards the future? Institutionality in terms of we had a discussion on royalties. We finished with a very good conversation, and we also have to look at what other countries are doing, like Argentina that has this RIGI. So these tax stability models that help the industry develop are very important. And so as an industry, I think we believe that any tax issue can generate noise and impact. So we're an industry that's very much committed to sustainability standards, not just producing more copper, but also how it is being produced is very relevant. Environmental regulation meeting, to me, is very important. The relationship with communities. I believe that if we don't have the social legitimacy, we cannot operate, and our capacity for continuing producing copper will be impacted. So we cannot forget that. I believe that it's also an industry that's operating with a lot of diversity, not just in gender. We've seen Chile is the country that has the largest participation of women in the mining industry, but also it's an industry that's bringing a diversity of formation and bringing different lines of thought and training and cultures as well. I believe that's very remarkable. I believe Chile is very well positioned. Probably what's happening today is we're facing a new phenomena related to strategic partnerships. I believe that for developing new minerals, industry is showing that there is an appetite and a direct action of developing these partnerships. In our case, we've announced and we are implementing this partnership with Anglo American to become Anglo-Tech, which is going to be one of the most relevant companies. But this has an impact in terms of efficiency and the capacity of developing more copper. We've seen the same with Codelco and Anglo American. So I believe Chile is very well positioned. There is history. We need to focus on competitiveness, and we are working on innovation and how to manage from a business perspective this tremendous challenge of producing copper for the goals that the world has set itself. Finally, Analia, on the energy sector, could we project the tendencies that we'll face this year? 2025 was a strong year in terms of green hydrogen. What's coming this year? Transmission, storage, where are more opportunities?
Thank you for the question. I think that we need to separate narratives and how we communicate things. the driver of investment in 2025, it was not the green hydrogen projects. There's lots of ads here. We need to announce some projects, and some are materialized. In 2025, we materialized renewable energies, solar energies, storage, wind energy, and also green hydrogen. Those projects have contributed to the installation of, I call it, the economical diplomacy. So it's a powerful tool for strategic positioning in Chile in regards to, a factor that will be essential for decarbonization of other sectors that are not electrical. But, competitive green hydrogen needs competitive green energy, renewable energy. So that's why, we should not stay ahead of ourselves. So the trends for 2026, 2030, I wanted to wrap this forum, answering William Malloy's question. He's not here in the room now, but he mentioned something that, and I hope you can all answer the same question. I think we can all do that. He asked, who's going to be the Chilean Hitachi, right? What's going to be the industry that will mobilize and that will accomplish not only mobilization of capital and, the creation of an infrastructure service that is of quality, etc., but something that will get us to the next level? I think it's electrification. And the entire industry that is committed to electrification, and that's going to create savings in terms of fuel import, and also benefits that will be focused on consumers. But there's a risk here, and the risk today is that the population is not perceiving the benefits of energy transition, and so it's mainly through the energy bills, electric bills. So there's a huge challenge from the standpoint of what we need to do, and I will link it to why do we need to focus the energy trends to those areas that will manage to create a benefit for the transformation. And for consumers, those are industries, us. That's why we manage to see why transformation is necessary, because if this is not necessary from the standpoint of a benefit, maybe this will not happen. So therefore, in the energy sector, and particularly in the electric market, to be able to reach that electrification, we need to reinforce storage systems, transmission, the flexibility of the system, so the system being able to respond and not happening at 25F, right? And so in the end, the prioritization of those trends will depend on the understanding of the next authorities and the public-private collaboration. We have the presidential area, we'll have 11 positions where the agenda of the next 5 or 4 years should be focused on, but we need to prioritize. And we need to have, the Hitachis of each sector. And one last tip, the export account of services in Chile, it's approximately $3,000 million a year, $3,000 million a year. So of course, that transformation we've had, when it comes to renewables storage, that is providing learning from the infrastructure standpoint and also for human capital. And so that is a huge opportunity to be able to have a new expansion of the services account, which in the end will help us export to the rest of the region, which is in the same path, the path of decarbonization, not only in the electrical sector, but in the energy that we consume. So how can we not be capable of agreeing on a national electrification plan and an expert plan for services that are related to decarbonization and energy transition? Those are my 2 bets for 2026, for 2030. Thank you. We have only a few minutes to close the conversation, and I'd like to take about, if you could take just 2-3 minutes in responding, but I'd like to know what are the main signals of trust or signs of trust that Chile should prioritize. We've talked about jurisdiction certainty, regulations, about the clarity in terms of permits, and so that's kind of the most important thing. But what other things you think are important from the investor standpoint? Analia, we'll start with you. Yes, jurisdictional certainty, and I'd like to clarify something. A jurisdictional certainty does not mean that we cannot propose reforms so that markets can be optimized, and that happens in every sector. So many times I hear that when there's an improvement that proposes to optimize the market, I see that there's some resistance based on the argument of jurisdictional certainty. So let's not mix those up. Now, second, I think that the capacity for communication of benefits, particularly in energy transition today, that's critical, and it's something that we need to learn how to narrate, and we need to be able to explain how can that be effective. We cannot do transformation if the benefits of transformation are not properly communicated. And just a message for my industry colleagues here, we need to learn how to communicate better. And that's also part of the complementary contribution of the signs of trust that we need to have, because if we cannot be good communicators of the benefits of the transformation, it's very unlikely that this will happen, and it's the responsibility of the industry. Thank you. Analia. Now Amparo. Apart from jurisdictional certainty, the tax administration, I think there's something quite relevant that has to do with the dialogue in the country. And I think it goes beyond the focus of the sectors where we operate. I have to move around in Latin America and other neighboring countries. I want to mention them, but there's always like a defense in the country, when it comes to investors. And I think in Chile, we are usually tempted to mention negative things abroad. I'm not saying that we should not be transparent, but I think when we look a country from outside, we see there's polarization and low capacity for a dialogue. That's a strength that Chile has had, and so I feel we need to go back to dialoguing and because investors, it's not like they are looking at things through a screen. No, they come here, they talk to you, they interact. And so I think if we have that capacity for dialogue and understanding, we'll probably provide a support for everything that we do more technically. Thank you, Amparo. Gloria? I think Chile has an opportunity here that is based on evidence, and Chile has managed to bring investment because they have honored their word, and I think there's an opportunity for the new government in doing the explicit declaration and inviting investors. If your words matter and your promises matter, when the president offers a certain backup and an investment of health investment in Chile, that is something that's quite credible, and there's an element there. And of course, we need to have we need to test that, and that is assessed with specialists, with measurements that aim in that direction. And we need to put together a backup for that promise. So I also agree with Amparo. I went over the politics. I was in politics just for a brief time. I wanted to put engineering in politics, but I didn't have time for that. But I realized that sadly there's some incentives that are set in a direction that is not very helpful. And deadlines are usually related to elections, and it could be more attractive for voters with a short-term look than a safeguard and something in the long term that benefits voters. So I think that there's something that has to do with the political world, because we need to push agreements that are valuable and that can help everyone and bring investment And lastly, Chile became attractive because it broke lots of schemes and investment came because in the first concessions we have the free flow tolls that nowhere else in the world they had it. There was only 2 areas in Israel and Canada, but there was a massive experience, and we dared to take that leap. And then we started with hospital concessions and airports, and I think that we're kind of stuck there. But innovation and everything that's provided by technology, it's very valuable. So being able to offer contracts that are more dynamic, technology allows to break schemes. And so at the moment we're in, it's not about continuity, it's about looking at where we need to be located on. Thank you. I would like to also second what Gloria said. It's about staying within our vision. We look at these plans, a national plan, a data center, a national strategy with AI, upping the technology, having a strategy for the government by 2030, 2035, and how we'll look at different benefits. And that should be regardless of the administration. And if things change, well, we should have the same goal. And for the country, having this as a goal in the country, not in the government. In the case of AWS, our region started, with the project of the government of President Piñera. Then we continue working with President Boric, and then we'll launch it with José Antonio Caz, the next president. So when a company wants to invest in Chile, they do it in the long term, and it's a long-term commitment. So that. And for that to happen, you need to show that you are clear on what you're doing. And you need to show how incentives will happen in real instances, and how all of these conversations now will reinforce the message and when it comes to authorities and when it comes to meeting your word, because you are committed to the country, not to government. Pilar, we'll close with you. Well, not to go over the importance of macroeconomic factors and political factors and leaving everything aside, looking in the long term. I think what's important from different industries, we should work in different matters that will enable the capital coming into Chile. Looking at platforms, systems, and we just launched our manual, and how investors should come to Chile, how this is something we did with banks, so that we could show how we have different platforms, and we hope for everything to be mentioned in international platforms. And it's important for us, for our industries, to understand and to adapt certain standards and international systems that will allow, as Gloria was saying, to go from one place to the other, from one highway to the other. For the ideas for when investors, when they come, they should be familiar with systems and with platforms that will bring investment. It's been quite the luxury having you all here. And let's give it up for everyone. Thank you for this morning's conversation. Thank you for joining us.